Today we're going to be talking about Agile architecture. And before we start, how many folks here are using Agile development in their part of their process? Good, quite a bit. Anyone that's not using Scrum? Okay. What are you guys using instead? You raise your hand. Any other methodology? Kanban? Okay. That kind of stuff. Okay, great. So today the talk, I'm going to introduce some ideas of what we're doing at our team in Oracle, and it does not presupposes that you have to use Agile development, but it really just borrows some ideas from Agile in order to kind of define kind of the vision and the path of your system from an architecture perspective. Let's get started. So this slide is really telling that my opinions and the ideas we're going to talk about here do not necessarily are of my employer. So this is kind of my Oracle does not. These are some of the things we're doing there, but do not necessarily represent the ideas of Oracle. All right, I've been a Java guy for about 15 years. I've started Java applets when the applets just kind of came out there. Started as a web designer in a kind of little internet service provider back in Brazil, where I'm originally from. Been employed of Oracle about 3 years. I joined actually Taleo in 2010, and since about a year and a half ago, Taleo has been acquired by Oracle, so we kind of joined the family. And Taleo does HR cloud-based software. Basically, we provide recruiting services, talent management, performance for about 50% of 50 of the Fortune 100 companies in US. Last year, about 30% of the people that were hired in the United States went through the Taleo products. And we have kind of two main family of products. We have an enterprise line, and we have a small, medium business. And completely different code bases, but everything is really Java and JEE. All right, based in Jacksonville, Florida. Our teams for the Taleo product are based in California, in Pleasanton, California, and in Krakow. So I spent last week actually in Krakow, kind of visiting the team there, and that kind of extended the visit here to talk today. We also have a development team in Quebec City, where kind of most of our enterprise folks are based. So the Taleo really started up there in Quebec, and we kind of are slowly kind of having offices in different locations based on previous acquisitions and things like that. All right, so why we're doing this talk today, I guess my motivation for doing this talk is really to start the conversation about why architecture is done the way it's being done. There are some problems inherent to how architecture has been done. In different opportunities, I kind of faced the same problem in terms of development is being done, systems are growing, and not enough attention to architecture, and there's an always increasing debt in the application in terms of where we want the application to go in terms of infrastructure perspective. The problem is really this. I mean, this is me. I was hired as an application architect for a product. Very excited to join the team, very eager to make a difference. And my director just came to me and said, Pablo, by the way, this is your baby now. Take good care of it and don't screw it up. So basically, I mean, I have a lot of input from him in terms of, what are the things that he wants to do with the system, where the system needs to go, and those type of things. Then at that point, my VP in engineering, he's actually the speaker in the next room over, he's now like, oh, you have a new guy now that is driving the product and from architecture's perspective. So now he's coming to me and giving me his list, his wish list of things that we want to be doing, and not necessarily in any standardized manner or form. So got two incoming requests that are sometimes duplicated, sometimes inconsistent and conflicting. Also working with my development managers in Krakow in North America. Basically, as we go through and we iterate through our stories, there are decisions that need to be made, not from a functionality perspective, but from a product perspective. Also working with product management, and this is one of my biggest stakeholders here. product management, it has their roadmap in terms of what they want to go and what they want to do, and basically come to me asking what are your estimates, how feasible it is to kind of create some of these new features that they want to do. I also work with our cloud ops, basically our infrastructure guys. Whenever we deploy our software, these guys are supporting us from an infrastructure perspective. They often come with requests for us to change the application, to configure differently, and there's also always conversations that I need to kind of manage with those guys. And each one of these errors coming to me basically is really saying that they have asks from an applications perspective, but I need to kind of prioritize them in different ways, but there's just so much that we can do at the same time. Then we have corporate standards, basically Oracle telling us our security standards, our localization standards, and all these things that need to kind of get into the system. We also have QA and support saying that they have pretty serious bugs that are not really customer facing, but are affecting the performance and tuning of the system. And this time I'm also doing code reviews from most developers, experimenting with new technologies, defining the future vision of the system, and I guess that's my main mandate, really kind of define where do we want this application to go. There are some hairy bugs that end up on my desk that I need to kind of look at them, and I still writing code. So those are the things that I'm trying to, I see happening, that I need to basically coordinate between all these stakeholders and the things that I need to do. So my stakeholders come to me and they say, okay, based on all these things that are going on, what are our top priorities right now, right? So what are the biggest issues in the application right now? This is one common question and not often easy to answer. So how are we doing in regards to architecture now next fiscal year? So basically what we want to be doing, what are the business priorities, and how do we align that to the architecture priorities in the system? How much is it really going to cost in terms of investment in the infrastructure? And why we haven't really started this project yet. So whatever project it is, I mean, what are the reasons that we haven't started X product? And my answer is like, oh, I really don't know. Let me get back to you on that. And basically is trying to have the answers for these problems that is really affecting everyone in the organization. So my idea was really to create a roadmap from an architecture perspective. So basically saying, okay, everyone is coming with these requests. Let's put it all on the table. Let's get alignment between all these teams. And I really need to prioritize what are the most important things. I need to be able to change them as new request comes in, and really kind of have it visible for everyone. So when a new request comes in and something kind of moves down in the priority, what happens is that whatever is the requester and the person that proposed that is going to be aware of that and understand what is the implication of their request, kind of a changing in the priority list, something like that. And also hopefully integrate into our development tools. So we want to be able to have something that I can bring into our Agile process and kind of flow through our product requests. Also executing incrementally. So basically, I don't have to do every one of these initiatives at the same time in one chunk. So my idea was really kind of looking for alignment here. So right now, when product is creating stories and kind of pushing those through the Agile process, my stories from an architecture perspective, they don't align because they really don't have a clear business value. So products organize everything by business value. They understand what is most important for their customers and what the customers are asking, but these things are completely, they're transparent to them. They don't care about those. Not always, but a lot of times that's the case. So for example, we have an issue right now that Cloud Ops is complaining that we're generating too many gigs of logs every so often. So now we have this initiative to really clean up our logs, revise our log levels and things like that. And when I bring that to the product folks, they really say, well, how does that compare? How is that more important than the feature I want to give it to my customer? And I don't have an answer for that. So creating this roadmap that is parallel to the product roadmap kind of provides a good sense of allowing me to prioritize what's important for me and them. And then after that, the question is, how do we bring that all together? All right, so we're going to be looking at a little bit of what is the problem today with traditional software architecture, the architecture in the Agile process. How does it feel that the fact that actually there is a good opportunity to do architecture there, that they really align, the fact that we should be doing architecture more incrementally, and then what is this roadmap and how can we use it? How can we take advantage of that? So really, what is software architecture? Basically, I'm kind of looked at the official there's so many different opinions of what that means, and so I guess the IEEE kind of took a stab at it and really saying that it's the fundamental organization of a system, components, and the environment, and really defines the relationship between these components. So I think this is kind of it's a key aspect of this. So you have a lot of components and blocks of codes. It could be a class, it could be a package, it could be a jar, and then over time, these things change, and the relationship of these components do change too. So that is something that we want to be, that kind of resonates to most folks in terms of what really architecture means. And this diagram is a software architecture diagram of what is software architecture. So it's not really meant to kind of for you guys to read it and understand it, but it really kind of makes the point that it's really trying to identify what are the components and what is the relationship of these components. And I guess most of the architecture diagrams that we see, they kind of look like that. It's really showing those relationships, really, right? The problem now is that software applications are growing exponentially, right? I've seen a research that says that we're going to double the total number of lines of code that we have ever been written in the next 5 years. So we are creating an immense amount of new components. We're creating a lot of new code, and those things are affecting the existing systems. And not always we kind of are revisiting the reasons, the architecture and the solutions that we've done whenever those systems were much smaller. So it's really kind of a questioning the fact that, I mean, we do most of our architecture ahead of time, and it's not always good. I mean, we want to be able to delay as much as we can making these architecture decisions and be able to have a process that kind of revisit those things frequently and incrementally. Okay, another one of the Lemon's laws of software evolution from 1980 is really saying that as a system evolves and that complexities goes up, basically the complexity goes up until we do work to actually control that complexity. So again, it's the fact that whenever I hear that in the Agile process, Scrum says, okay, we address the architecture as part of the stories that we're kind of going through, I say that that's not enough. We need to kind of be closing and looking at a complexity from things that not necessarily triggered by product requests. And because, I mean, things are changing, even if the code is not even changing, but if your usage of the system changes, basically you have too much usage and your performance goes down. I mean, those are reasons to kind of revisit architecture. This kind of shows a little bit of how architecture work kind of really comes up in terms of requirements. So in the beginning of the project, you have set up your foundation, you have to do a lot of architecture work, maybe not even functionality, you just creating your patterns, creating your decisions. And as time goes on, that kind of you don't deal so much with architecture, you're really focusing on the product, but every so often, there are major features and you kind of need to revisit that architecture, and then hopefully that happens much less frequently is the full rewrites that needs to be done. But this kind of shows that over time that work really never ends. I found this whiteboard drawing online, and it really resonated to me. So today, I mean, architects are really kind of they kind of create the design, created patterns, and in one, and completely in separate environments than their developers. So there's a lot of decisions that are done in a vacuum, and it's kind of difficult to confirm and understand what are the reasons, how things were actually implemented, and for the developers to understand why the architect made some of those decisions. The architect might be getting a lot of inputs from different parts of the organization and probably have different motivations than the developers not always have visibility. So this is something that we need to kind of revisit. And even though there's a value in seeing the kind of the overall broad view of the system that developers that are working the code not necessarily have, I think there is the architect needs to also be very familiar with what is the state of the code, right? So there's really no clear ways of really saying, okay, you take this diagram and implement exactly how it is here, and then having a feedback loop of what it was designed and was actually implemented. So can we do things a little bit different than this? I mean, we're doing a lot of upfront work. We're doing, architects are really kind of consider this different type of people that do not really write code and are working with the developers. And I think there's an opportunity to do things a little bit more different here. I think in the Agile kind of brings a lot of concepts that kind of make a lot of sense here. So this is just a kind of general description of what Scrum tells us, that we kind of need to do our product planning iteratively. Then for every so often, we kind of pick up some of the most important stories. We kind of plan that sprint, and we start the sprint process. And then at the end of each sprint, we have a deliverable product, a deliverable, something we can ship it, something we can deliver. And what makes sense to me here is that we shouldn't be only doing this based on user stories, which is kind of one of the premises of Scrum, is really that we should also have our architecture stories as part of that. And then it creates the concept of, right now we have product backlogs that describe new user functionality, and why not having an architecture backlog that really kind of defines all the user stories that might or might not be related to support a product, and kind of this is kind of the idea in general. All right, so business value versus architecture. So one of the main things on Scrum is really that if it doesn't have business value, it's really not a story. You have to, it's really a chore or something you have to do, something that needs to get done. But the business value is kind of the main driver for completing and doing work in the application. And I think there are certain things that we need to consider here, is that the system, as the system grows, we have to, there's certain hygiene that the system needs to have, and I think this picture tries to exemplify that. I mean, she doesn't look very happy brushing her teeth there, but she has to. Well, most of us have to, and I don't wake up in the morning super happy because I'm going to brush my teeth. But there are certain things that you just have to do, and as your system grows, those hygienes need to kind of become very, very present in your system, and you need to kind of be able to prioritize them accordingly. So products need to understand that there's a need to do those type of things on an ongoing basis. So basically, Scrum assumes that all the work, that the architecture work is done as needed. So you have a new story, you meet with your team, and you say, okay, so we don't have the ability of doing this today. We need to include a certain feature, but this feature might be able to impact other things. So we kind of need to visit and do the architecture work at that point, and that's fine. But there's a number of situations that architecture work, there's architecture work needed, but it's not going to be really triggered by user stories. And so I guess that's the thing. There's no necessarily architecture that's going to have necessarily a business need associated with that. So then it becomes really difficult to map those stories to the architecture work that is needed. I think we kind of asserted that at this point, and where do we draw the line, right? So how much do I need to invest in architecture versus product? So the idea here is that we would introduce the architecture owner, which has been introduced by Scott Ambler in the discipline Agile delivery. So Scott mentions that differently than what Scrum proposes is really, you have a product owner, you have a team lead, which would be your kind of in Scrum, the Scrum master. And the team members, but not only that, you also create the idea of introducing the architecture owner. And the architecture owner kind of participates in the sprints as a stakeholder there, and is the one that is able to bring some of these things into become more visible to everyone. What are those needs from an architecture perspective? He will be responsible for also uncovering a lot of architecture work that needs to be done as part of the product stories, as well as bringing new stories into the mix. And the architecture roadmap is really kind of a parallel to what the product folks are doing, and this is kind of maintained separately. So this is an example. I'm gonna show you. I couldn't set up my internet today here, but I have some slides that we can show through. So this is a board that we manage. This is a simple application that I've set up and using Jira Greenhopper. And I kind of show a little bit of sense of how your tools can kind of help you set up this type of roadmap. But the idea of the roadmap is really not only from fitting into the process that you have, but also kind of making us think about what is the vision for the system in terms of, when my stakeholders are thinking, where do we want to go? It's really making us think forward, which is not always the clear suggestion in Agile, right? Agile is really telling us to say, okay, we just need to work in this iteration, then we go to the next. It's very iterative, responsive, but what's going to happen in 1 year, 2 years, 3 years from now? Where is really the application going? So you really you need to define a vision in terms of where your system wants to go. And you probably need a lot of information from different people in your organization, especially product, to say, okay, what are the things that we're thinking about from a long-term perspective, and defining that list, that full list that if we complete everything there, we will kind of reach our business goals. So defining the objectives for a few years or so, it's fairly mutable. I mean, it doesn't have to be set in stone. I mean, you can have new things pop up and fit in different places there. Can include your production bugs that are architecture related only, and basically it's visible to everyone. So the way we're doing it, basically our epics, our architecture epics are really our major technical initiatives, right? It could be converting to an OR mapping tool. It could be changing our IDs to UUIDs, universal IDs on the database. There are a number of things that we basically identify and create as epics. And as we go on, we break all these things and make them as incremental as we can, right? We can maybe today start the migration for a part of the code only that only affects one portion and have coexistence, and really make that bite-size feature of not only the way we do stories, but the way we do architecture work. And then we fit that into the sprints. And there's a couple ways that we can fit that in that we're going to discuss here. But basically, it's really the trust that comes out of having that architecture owner and the product owner work together. It's kind of one of the secret sauces. Ben, when you define your epics, also you kind of define, you understand, you do a little. This is a little dangerous because then you're not really writing PRDs or anything like that, right? You're still keeping things light. And but you're really kind of thinking a little bit more than what would you otherwise just do the stories directly for the product. So you're really looking at what are the dependencies, the relationships that these things will kind of bring into the system, and what is the business value to be able to push that through and justify to your peers that needs to be done. Then there are some risks and assumptions, and also the potential solutions that you're going to do there. So really just defining that vision, even though you haven't solved that problem yet. The prioritization is based on what we do is based on doing what was return of investment here. So since we were acquired by Oracle, we had a number of technologies that we used that were from Oracle competitors. So in our case, we kind of been going through a number of iterations of taking out some of these third parties and bringing in Oracle technology to our baseline. So before we would have to pay for all these Oracle tools, and now we don't have to because we're a part of Oracle. So it's really something that kind of popped up in our architecture, because basically now there was a huge return on investment of doing those now versus later. And then that we need to take the impact of risk affecting things and how everything can really match to our business goals. So this is something that I do with a number of folks. I do with my directors. I do with product, and we have quarterly meetings to review where we are, and that becomes very visible to everyone if everyone has disagreements or basically need to kind of revisit how things are really prioritized. And in terms of fitting that into our Agile process, the way we do it is at the organization level. We understand that we can do so much with the development team. So today we have 3 development teams, 2 in North America, 1 in Poland. And basically we understand when we know our capacity. So we can do 100 points per release. And from those 100 points, today we're doing 100 points of product stories. So with the introduction to this, what we did is at the organization level, we defined, okay, how much can we really dedicate to architecture that would still allow us to do product stories and things like that. So we had a good conversation with product. Our product team is really understood where we're coming from, and some of these stories, they understand that is needed. And basically we created this split, right? That could be whatever in your organization, kind of depends on how your product with the stage that your product is and how's performance and things like that. And today, this is our split. We do 20 points of architecture work, so that my list flows much more slowly than their list from the product folks. But at the same time, I have the power to kind of prioritize what are the things that are most important to me without having to justify to product what to do. And in terms of fitting into our Agile process, we kind of entertained two main different ways of tackling this. And one was really having a separate sprint altogether, a separate team altogether that would just take the architecture work and the other teams will do product. And also be able to borrow developers from the product work and kind of having two parallel sprints. And the problem was, there was a few problems with that, the fact that whenever your team agree to a number of points, number of stories they're going to do, it's really difficult to really commit to two different sprints. And then it becomes conflicting because if one sprint's running behind, how do you guys still doing work in the other sprint, those type of things. So what we really went for was the combined sprint. So our teams, every team member is working in one and only one sprint. And basically they're doing stories from both roadmaps. That's what we like to do, and it's been very successful for us doing. From an architectural owner perspective, the main thing is really the participation in the story grooming sessions, right? So whenever product comes in with the stories, the architect owner needs to kind of be there to understand what is the impact of their stories. And then also, so we can do the proper estimation, have the proper conversations to kind of uncover any issues, and also bring their own stories. So I want to bring my own stories with product, and we kind of go through, we kind of create our estimates, and everything is back in the product roadmap and architecture roadmap, all prioritized. As my stories, as architecture stories are fit in the different sprints, it's recommended that I go there for the sprint planning, for the daily scrums, for the sprint, I got a couple of sprint planning there, but that would be the sprint demo, the second to last one there. So the architecture owner's team is going to be participating pretty closely of the whole process, and it really becomes a stakeholder in the whole development. There are a few issues that we run into every so often is really that interdependencies between the product and architecture. What happens is the product brings some stories that we actually don't have a solution for it. We don't understand how we're going to do it. And what really triggers us to be able to, okay, stop, let's test this out, let's play with different technologies and prove this before we can actually build it. And what that creates is that we have sprints that are dedicated to proof of concept, so we're really not building anything that is really production ready. But it allows us to kind of learn about the problem and solve that. So that feedback loop between product and finding out how we're going to implement it, it kind of becomes much more trivial to do. Instead of basically having our developers take the stories from product and kind of do that in a rush as part of the sprint for that same delivery. So we can kind of forecast a little bit more whenever we need to do these proof of concepts. And this is how we do it. Basically, a lot of our planning for architecture, we do the prep for sprint end way ahead of actually when the sprint end takes place. So as even on sprint n-1, we're doing the prep work for the next sprint. So we are a little bit ahead of the curve, but still trying not to be, having to define that many two way ahead of time. So kind of one hop behind than that whenever the work needs to be done. All right. In terms of predicting, estimating, go back to the Agile methodology. So predicting is not always trivial. You need to kind of have understanding what is the full scope of the things that you need to do. And in Agile, that's not always, folks tend to not have to define the full scope of things. And what we've been doing is that we understand that how accurate our point estimates are and how many points we can do in every release. So over time, we became very reliable in kind of predicting in terms of how many points something is going to take and what is a point system for us. What's our point system across the different teams? So we're doing a lot of even at the epic level, creating high level estimates of points and And with that, I can really have an idea of, if I'm doing 20 points per release, how long it's going to take to get to position X of my priority list. All right, I have a quick demo here. I just have a few slides that I want to show. We switch here to presentations. So this is how kind of generally, this is not our own application. This is something we just put together as a sample proof of concept again. And it's a website. This is the stories to create a website that you can book flights and you can book hotel rooms. And basically here, what I have is the architecture roadmap. So as an architect, this is what you see, and that's what you come and manage to use. So I know that my backlog right now has 9 different stories. So here on the left are my epics, right? Those are the things from architectural work that I need to get done in this system. I want to introduce universal IDs, SSO, hard deletes, dependency injection. From that point on, I get agreement from everyone, from all stakeholders, that this is my priority, right? I want to do universal IDs before I do my hard deletes and so forth. So after that agreement has been made, I can go in and create my stories that are specific for those tasks and map them to each one of the epics. And basically, right now I have 3 teams that are working in some stories, but then when the next sprint iteration goes and I go to my story grooming sessions, I will just bring these top stories here to be voted. So these actually have been voted here. Those are the point estimates for those. So the next sprint planning, it becomes very obvious to say, okay, what are the things that are kind of working on next? So these are the stories that are being worked on now. From the tool, we can see that here the progress where we are in each one of the sprints. This one is actually not looking very good. Not looking very good. This one has some stuff in progress. But again, this is the visibility just from my architecture stories. So this is the way that Greenhopper provides. You can kind of separate quite well the different boards of what visibility you have in each one of those. And this is as a owner of the organization, right? As at the director level, this is the overall view of the system of what is going on for my release. So this kind of puts it all together. So this is just another view of the system that really, oops, wrong button. That this is the overall backlog of things that include all the epics, the product epics. I have my flight reservations, hotel reservations, email newsletter. Those are all the different epics across the board. Combined with the architecture ones and the overall backlog for it. So if I take a look at here, this is all these different stories that are happening in the system that are being kind of developed right now, which includes some architecture work, some product work, and so forth. So this all of a sudden kind of makes a lot of sense because I know whenever I start my sprint, I know how many points I can put for product and how many points I can put for architecture, and that split, it's really predefined. There's no misalignment there between the product folks and the non-product work that needs to be done. Yeah. Yeah. Well, the decision that they need to do, yes, the team decides. So at that point, there's an understanding that from one release that we're going to have multiple sprints for that release, right? We have 100 points total, but 20 points of those are going to be done from the architecture work, okay? At that point, they can pick and choose which stories they're going to do in what sprint, but then we kind of understand that that release is going to include certain stories that are being prioritized more highly. Well, not every sprint. They can do all the product work first, and then the last 2 sprints just do architecture work. It's really across the release for us. That makes sense? And this is another view. Again, just kind of a show. What are the things that the way we kind of get visibility into the system. This is the overall view of all the work that is being done, And so we can see all the items that are in progress and waiting to be started and things. So, and we can kind of also separate only the architecture related ones. So as an architect, I feel I get a lot of visibility for this. Our product folks also can see all the work that is done without having to see the architecture. So even though we're working very close together, it's kind of hard for them to really kind of become interested in some of the kind of the house cleaning that we're doing through some of our stories. And with that, I mean, part of the tooling too, I can get some very interesting metrics, right? So I can just everything, I can create dashboards, I can create, have a really full visibility and show my managers and directors what has been done and what is coming up in the pipeline. And there is some limitations today what Greenhopper, at least this version of Greenhopper, can do as part of Jira and dashboards. Anyone using Jira here? Okay, awesome. So this is probably pretty familiar to you guys, but the newest version of Jira Agile kind of makes a lot of enhancements in kind of tying up Greenhopper, well, the Agile part of it with Jira itself. So you can have widgets and components and things that you can kind of really map to the Scrum or Kanban side of things. All right, let's go back to the deck. Cool. All right, so some of the challenges here. I think the key aspect of this is finding your perfect split. That was the issue for us. So where do we split? Where do you create the split of how many stories do you do in product and how many products you do in architecture? And creating that sense of trust really between the product owner and the architecture owner. I think it's really the team together with these owners and kind of making a call of what is really the most important things for the system in general, not so much from a user asks and user business value, but also what can we do today that can really make our work a little bit easier in the future. And yeah, after we put this in place, now I can answer some of these questions that I couldn't answer before. So in terms of what are my biggest issues in the app right now, I can just look at my architecture dashboard and I can filter all my bugs and those are my problems, right? Those are the things that I care about. They're going to be sorted by importance and I can really have some context information of that. And basically, whatever is the order there is the order that has been agreed upon by all. So kind of making that visible kind of goes a long way. So what we're doing in regards to architecture next fiscal year, I probably have a better idea now of answering that because I know my overall epic estimates for each one of those things. I know how many points I can do in every release. So I kind of get an idea of where is my cutoff line that is likely to be done and not likely to be done or very much not likely to be done. In terms of investments, I can kind of look at those and see what are the things that maybe it's better for us to buy instead of kind of building house or outsource versus to investing in you use up our points, right? And why we haven't started Project X? Yes, now because we've worked on Project A, B, C, and D, and they were higher in the priority. I guess that's the kind of becomes very obvious to kind of answer some of these questions. So. Yeah, so using the roadmap really, and that being an artifact that kind of defines the rules of engagement and kind of people understand that is the order that's been agreed upon. I mean, you might not like the order, but I mean, there's just so many things that we can do at the same time, and even though someone ultimately needs to make a call of what's more important than what, at least we have an agreement on that, and at least force that conversation. So. Now I feel I'm able to really kind of communicate the vision when we really didn't have a vision before. We had ideas and we have desires of doing certain things, but now we kind of have a really good grasp on where we're going to go with the system. What are the things that are in the radar, and if it's not in the radar, at least we have a radar now to kind of track some of these things. We instead of just kind of focusing on the next couple iterations or the next release or two. Now we have a longer view of where we're going to go, and even our product folks are kind of taking some of these ideas of kind of creating their vision a little bit more longer term. I get the metrics now. I know how many points and what is the value that I get from a technical perspective from the points that I get from the different releases. And then I have basically a prioritized list that I mean I can run so many things in parallel there, but those are my next things, the next things on my map. For example, I have developers. My developers all have this list bookmarked in their list, and if they have any extra free time or if they want to take a break of certain things, they can just go to this and pick the next story assigned to them and kind of do work for that. So even if it's not as part of this current sprint, they still have the ability to understand and see what's most important to us and make progress on that. It has been really good for communicating to everyone else. I mean, basically, people had misconceptions that their stuff was going to be done soon, and now they see that it's no longer the case. That didn't solve that problem, that they wanted to be done soon, but at least now they know soon enough that if they will or will not be getting their requests done in time. And again, it really kind of helped us say, okay, if there's so many more important things right now, so something that is kind of further down the roadmap might be a reason for us to acquire something out externally to kind of bring it in. All right, so just from an architect position, I mean, some of the things that we really want to focus when you kind of trying to kind of roll this out in your organization is really keep an open dialogue with everyone. I think I've not in this current position, but in a previous situation, we really had some nasty relationships with our product folks. And since we kind of rolled out Agile, our product folks are still a little bit skeptical about Agile in general. So they really kind of never fully bought into it. So now we come with the story, hey, by the way, I'm going to take some of your points, and your throughput's going to go down. But kind of creating that understanding that maybe this is for the better good. And if we do some of those things now, we have the ability to do more things with fewer points later on. And it's not always the case, but sometimes it is. I try to also keep a close look on what your product folks are thinking, right? A lot of my stories actually unlock a lot of potential for what they can do. So sometimes they think certain things are really hard to do, and they don't really kind of focus on that just because of that. So having that conversation, knowing what's coming on their product roadmap affects my product roadmap. What I know it's important to them, it becomes important to me too, and it kind of affects my ordering. And encourage your team members to add things to the roadmap. So when my developers find problem areas of the system that are too big to tackle as part of the stories they're working on, just put in a roadmap, create bugs, create refactoring ideas and things like that. And some of those ideas are, might be very easy and provide a huge benefit for us. So we can just we can easily kind of respond to some of those things. And everyone really feels that they have a voice in the system, right? So they can put something in there, we kind of decide together. What tends to happen is that we can't do as much as we'd like to, so there's some conflict because of that, but at least we have, at the end of the day, we have an agreement. And another thing, try to provide a reason why you do things a certain way. So why do we prioritize A versus B sooner? Even for explaining to other folks what is the motivation. Later on, a year from now or 2 years from now, you can kind of revisit that and have a record of what was the context when a decision was made. I think that kind of something that kind of get lost a lot of the time. And then later on, it's like, oh man, what these guys did do. I mean, this decision was stupid, but then if you look at it a little bit of some of the extra variables that are kind of in place whenever the decision is made, then it kind of, it provides value over time. We also communicate our victories. We have our dashboards of what was done, of what was accomplished, and it kind of goes a long way. So we kind of see that we're making progress towards where we want to go. And again, the tool works great for that. We have quarterly reviews with everyone and kind of communicate where we are and where we were and where we are now. So kind of make that visible so people get the feedback loop of what's being worked on. It has an impact in the system. Okay. Just for further reading here, this is a suggestions here. A lot of these architecture owner ideas come from this book, from the discipline Agile Delivery. It tries to solve some of the issues around larger Agile teams and dispersed Agile teams. It kind of really creates a new layer on top of